Welcome to Chatsunami. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Chatsu Nani. My name's Satsunami and joining me today is none other than the ad-libbing master himself. It is Andrew. Andrew, welcome back. What a start to the episode.
I know. I have like a million references from the Abridged series. I'm just like, hold on now, quickly.
Why won't you dodge? Or rather ad-lib. But yeah, how are you doing tonight?
I'm good, thank you. I'm very good. It's been a good month and we're finally into summer. Glad to see the sun again.
Doobie-dooba. Yeah, indeed. It is that summer weather. You are probably listening to this episode as you frolic in the sun, or if you're in Scotland, if you're sitting indoors watching the rain. But that aside, terrible weather aside, today we are going to be talking about something quite near and dear to us today. We're indeed going to be talking about something that actually you and I bonded over, that of course being Abridged series, in particular anime Abridged series. But before we go into this wonderful topic, I've just got to ask you, Andrew, what is your history with Abridged series?
So my history with the Abridged series kind of starts with a anime adjacent property. It's Avatar: The Last Airbender Abridged. I'd never heard of the term Abridged until I came across this content. At the time, Avatar was still, I think it was still ongoing. I don't think season 3 had finished yet. And it was just kind of making fun of sections of season 1. It didn't really go that far into the show. And I thought it was the funniest thing. I thought it was so clever, so interesting. I loved that it was able to sort of reference a show I loved so much. And then they jumped and did like a episode on season 3, which I think just was like a crash bunch of different episodes from season 3 altogether. And I thought that was really funny at the time as well. Going back, it's pretty weak, both in terms of just general comedy and also just since I've seen other Abridged series, the editing quality of it isn't nearly as strong. But that was kind of my initial start into Abridged series. But it wasn't really until you mentioned it at the start there, when we were in university, you actually introduced me to a specific Abridged series, which we'll get into in more depth in a little bit, that really kind of sparked my interest in it again, and that it could be about anime, and that you were having so much fun, or these creators were having so much fun playing with the properties, the visual gags, the various editing choices they made to almost tell a new story. So that is kind of my intro to Abridged series. What about yourself?
Well, I have to say, I think my introduction to this is a little bit milquetoast, but I, of course, listened to the absolutely fantastic Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged series back in the day with little Kuriboh. He does an absolutely brilliant job for reasons that we will get into later on in the episode, but I started watching that and then I watched a couple of others, especially the very famous Team 4-star one with the Dragon Ball Abridged, and there were just so many at the time, I have to say, because I think Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged caused this somewhat domino effect, and like you said, there were so many Abridged series out there, some better than others. Again, we'll get onto that in the main part of the episode, but there were a lot of ones that really don't hold up today, given the types of jokes they make, given the editing, the sound quality, etc., etc. Not like Chatsunami.com, but we'll come back to that. Yeah, it was a bit of a mix. It was a Wild West time where everyone wanted to do their own Abridged series, but those were the two kind of main ones for me. It wasn't until university, and this is something we covered in our significance of the Dragon Ball series episode that we did together, where I was talking to you, I mentioned about Dragon Ball Z Abridged, and you went away and watched it, you came back through again, you were saying this is the best thing ever. That's pretty much how we became friends, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it certainly cemented a friendship with us through the shared kind of love of this, that I had such an interest in Dragon Ball Z and the original Dragon Ball series. At that point, fairly recently rewatched all of Dragon Ball Z. So when you then introduced this abridged version of it that sort of shortened down, maybe like 5 to 10 minutes an episode comedy, I thought it was just the most clever thing. The editing was so well done with the lip syncing they were able to sort of do, that they created jokes out of things you hadn't even really thought about much in the show. And it just made that that such a much more enjoyable experience.
Oh no, absolutely. And of course, that led us on to the rabbit hole of other abridged series. So things like Hunter X Dumber, which is something, for some reason, there's only one joke. In fact, sorry, there's two jokes in that you and I constantly reference. The bit where Hisoka's saying, like, I don't need it. And I know technically that's a SpongeBob reference, but still the way that he does it is the way we do, like, I don't need it. I need it. And the other one is when there was a character in Hunter x Hunter called Leorio. Yeah, there's a character called Leorio, but in this abridged series they call him the Oreo, and it's so stupid. It's one of my favourite jokes of all time. And as you did there, he does this like really stupid voice going, I'm the Oreo, and it's so damn funny. We have also seen the Sword Art Online abridged series together with, I think it's something Witty Entertainment.
It is, yeah. It's still ongoing as well, which they don't produce them with regularity. It takes a very long time for them to get the content out, but I think that is possibly one of my favourite, if not my favourite, abridged series.
Oh, absolutely. I would 100% agree with you there. It is just so masterfully done. And I'm trying to think of the other ones we've seen, because did you see the Hellsing abridged series?
Yeah, pretty sure I did. I have seen Hellsing Ultimate as well. I struggle to remember if I've actually watched all of Hellsing abridged or if it was just Hellsing Ultimate that I watched, but I'm pretty sure I've watched Hellsing abridged. Team 4-Star also did a one-off Attack on Titan episode that was in our lexicon for quite some time. I think we would watch that at least 2 or 3 times a week for a good couple of months and just reference it very frequently. So that holds a very special place in my heart. It's a shame they only ever made just that. I'm pretty sure it was only ever just one special that they did for it. And yeah, I can't think of many others. Did you ever watch 50% Off?
What one was that again?
That was free. You know, the swimming anime?
Oh, yeah.
50% Off was absolutely brilliant. It was so clever. I'm pretty sure the YouTuber Garnt made a Code Geass abridged series, if I'm remembering correctly. I didn't unfortunately watch any of that. I don't know if you did.
Yeah, no, I didn't see that one, but that actually reminds me of another one that I forgot to bring up there, and that was the Pokemon abridged series.
Oh, right, yeah.
By, I want to say One Kids, or it was something silly like that, but it was such a good series because our good friend Martin McAllister had watched it as well, and we always quote Ash in that series. He has like a very gruff battle kind of voice like that, and that's the way he says battle. So whenever we're saying, oh, we need to battle, what was the other quote? Oh yeah, when they're making fun of Misty for being rational and they go, that's crazy Misty, and you know, we just kind of riff on the things that they say, and it is honestly one of the better ones out there. But see, without any further ado, while we go edit our lip flaps and decide to just jump into this episode.
Sure thing. Just lastly though, did you ever watch Ghost Stories?
Oh, I was wondering when this was going to come up. Yeah.
Because the interesting thing about Ghost Stories, before we get into what makes a good and what makes a bad abridged series, the interesting thing with Ghost Stories is that it's an actually official abridged series. It was officially the English dub of the Ghost Stories anime, which is an absolutely insanely terribly written anime. I was looking through some of the abridged series, and the screenshot they chose has, and I bet you can picture this exactly from me to saying it, where a character goes, leave me alone, I'm doing my standard anime elbows up pose.
I'm going to edit what I'm about to say here, but my favourite one's still when they are looking for a ghost and it's the cat that talks, and he's like, oh, it could be a ghost or it could be a bitch. And then later on they find the ghost and the cat goes, run, she's a ghost and a bitch. All I'll say is, last time I watched the full thing, it's on Amazon Prime, and some of it is absolutely hilarious, but please be warned because there is some not so PC jokes in there as well, so go in there with the expectation to laugh at it, but if you're more sensitive to that type of humour, just be warned. And that is a fascinating, honestly, we need to do an episode on that sometime because it is just such this weird bubble of anime that honestly has not been challenged ever since in an official capacity.
I think we know what we're doing for our Chatsu Nani for October then.
I was going to say, Halloween time. Yeah, let's do it. So let's go plan for that, and we will be right back after these messages. Welcome to Chatsu Nani, a variety podcast that discusses topics from gaming and films to anime and general interests.
Previously on Chatsunami, we've analysed what makes a good horror game, conducted a retrospective on Pierce Brosnan's run as James Bond, and listened to us take deep dives into both the Sonic and Halo franchises.
Also, if you're an anime fan, then don't forget to check us out on our sub-series, Chatsu Nani, where we dive into the world of anime. So far, we've reviewed things like Death Note, Princess Mononoke, and the hit Beyblade series.
If that sounds like your cup of tea, then you can check us out on Spotify, iTunes, and all good podcast apps.
As always, stay safe,
Stay awesome, and most importantly,
stay hydrated.
We're Seismic Cinema. I'm Colin. I've probably not seen it. Paul's watched it in the wrong order.
And I'm James, and I've probably written an essay on it. And at Seismic Cinema, we believe in the power of escapism.
Oh, thank God for that. That'll do.
This is Luke from the Nerdstalgic Podcast, and you're listening to Chatsunami, a member of the Podpack Collective.
So let's get into the topic that everyone has been on the edge of their seats waiting to listen to. That, of course, being what makes a good abridged series. So starting off, I'll kick us off with the first one. And this is going to sound like a weird one and maybe a wee bit gatekeepy, but I genuinely think that good voice acting is something that you genuinely need for the longevity of a series, especially an abridged series. What are your thoughts on that?
I would agree. I think that it's like anything. If you have a voice that grates or one that doesn't feel like it fits the character, then it's gonna be a turn off in terms of the content that you're watching. Sometimes it can work in a very contrasting way that you expect someone to sound like something and they sound not at all like that, in which case that in itself can work, but it has to be executed well. You can't just go in with just no enthusiasm, no, I don't want to say acting pedigree, but like any kind of ability of acting. If you don't have that kind of level of acting to begin with, it's not going to come across as good content in the finished product. So I don't think it is necessarily gatekeepy. I think it is kind of common sense that better content sounds better when better people are involved with the production of it and the creation of it. So I think that that is a very important part of it. And I think that the editing kind of comes into this as well, but if they can match lip flaps, I think that helps a lot as well.
Oh no, absolutely. They definitely go hand in hand, because I think you could just group it together as the production quality of the series, because if you look at things like, as I said before, with Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged and even the Team 4 Stars Dragon Ball Abridged, the fact is that although they might not have started as strong as maybe they would have liked to, they put in so much effort when it came to side jokes and edits and things like that, and the voices just got better and better. But there were a couple of shows, and I can't remember off the top of my head, but especially at this time, there were a dime a dozen of people trying to copy the success of these shows, but they all sounded the same. If someone was acting a character, you know, it'd be like, oh, look, I'm a character. Oh, look, I'm also a character. And then you would get the very famous, if it was a guy who was doing that on his own, but he needed a female character, he would speak like this. You know, it would always be like that. And I know Little Kuriboh does that as a kind of joke for, I think it's Taya in Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged, but there's some people that do it, but I don't think they do it almost as a joke. They just kind of do it because they don't have anybody else, and then eventually they'll kind of just burn out and you'll never see that series again. So production value in editing and voice acting, definitely. But flipping it onto you now, what's another thing you would say makes a good abridged series?
I think, again, it sounds silly, but the writing, I know it sounds easy to say like, oh, well, it's already written for them, the show is there, but a good abridged series is able to take foundations of what the show has given you and make it your own. The best shows can homage the original property whilst also making it their own unique property and doing it in a way that is entertaining. The examples of Dragon Ball Abridged, they were able to sort of use the exact same storyline that Dragon Ball Z had given them, but create their own recurring side gags, shorten the length of the episodes to just the most important bits that they can kind of create the comedy from, and still tell that story. I could argue that you could watch all of, they only go up to the end of the Cell Saga, so they don't go to the end of Dragon Ball Z, but you could watch the majority of Dragon Ball Z just by watching Dragon Ball Abridged, and you would understand essentially everything that you need to understand from what Dragon Ball Z is, who the characters are, with the odd exception of where they change some of the characters' kind of motivations to an extent. But for the most part, it's very similar, but it feels its own unique universe. Then you have something like Sword Art Online, which has taken this kind of similar kind of format, running through the episodes and changing it up ever so slightly, just kind of depending on the characters' motivations that they've created, where they've changed who the characters fundamentally are and based the actions of what we've seen in the anime, but just changing it ever so slightly to how that character might react given that scenario. And that is itself very interesting. On a different scale of that, you have something like 50% Off, which, full disclosure, I've never actually watched free, but from my understanding, it is vastly different. I have watched 50% Off, and 50% Off is very funny. It takes these characters and just changes the story and who the characters are to such an extreme extent that it is a completely different kind of idea of what the show is, but it still works. It's still absolutely brilliant. It's hilarious, and they're able to sort of write that in such a unique, interesting way. Sorry, I've been monopolizing here. Do you have anything to say on that just now?
No, I was going to say, if you didn't have anything to say, this would be a very short episode. Yeah, no, I'm totally with you there. And you brought up some really interesting points there, especially about the idea of the writing being quite transformative in the way that it tells the story, because I was talking to a couple of friends off air, just asking them if they had seen the Abridged series and really what their thoughts were. So one of the comments that we got came from Super Shadow 271, very lovely chap, and he was saying something very similar to you there, to say that he thinks that a good Abridged series is one that makes a good commentary on the original series while still being able to communicate most of the plot. So basically to embody the term of abridging. And I think especially in terms of the writing, that is a very, very important thing, because a lot of series that fizzled out and died around late 2000, early 2010s were ones that didn't really have much to say about the source material. You know, they would turn around and say, oh, isn't it stupid that this character's doing this? Ho, 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 funny voice, huh, problematic meme, you know, and we will get onto that. But with especially, and I think the top trifecta of Abridged series that have done this perfectly are the Sword Art Online one, the Dragon Ball Abridged, and the Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged. I would say, at least for Team 4-Star and Little Kuriboh, both of them have a love for the franchise and the series as a whole. I don't know if Something Witty, the production company that does Sword Art Online Abridged, I don't know if they have the same love for the source material, but what they've done with it is they've taken a series that is highly controversial, highly problematic. Go listen to our episode in Sword Art Online if you don't believe us, but they've taken that and they've made such a compelling series. They've twisted bits of the plot, they've just made it their own, and I think that's absolutely fantastic. And they've reinvigorated people's interest in these properties, especially for me, and I know this is something we brought up before, but the fact that when I saw Dragon Ball, I was like, oh, right, it's that show that I used to watch when I was younger, and you know, I had no interest in revisiting it until I watched the Abridged series. And it was the same with Yu-Gi-Oh! Although I'm not a massive Yu-Gi-Oh! Fan to begin with, I was still interested in going back and seeing what Little Kuriboh and all the other Abridgers were making fun of, but they do it in such a passionate way, in such a respectful way. Do you think that these series can be credited for reinvigorating fans' interests in the source material?
Absolutely. I think mostly for the likes of Yu-Gi-Oh! And Dragon Ball Z, I think they got a new life from these Abridged adaptations. That's what's always so interesting about these kind of parodies of these properties. They always get like copyright struck from the original creators, or rather the production companies of the original properties. And what they fail to understand is that these abridged series, for the most part, are actually increasing interest in your property and more likely that people will watch it again, buy merchandise for it, that there's so much to gain from having a successful abridged series about your show rather than immediately copyright striking it. If it is a complete destruction of an intellectual property, then I can understand. If they're going a bit too edgy and you don't want your property to be associated with that, again, I can understand why you might be kind of hesitant for that. But when shows are able to sort of drum up interest again, and like Dragon Ball Z has had interest for decades, it's not necessarily the case of, oh, it was one of those forgotten anime until Team 4-Star came along. It wasn't. People were watching Dragon Ball Z. As I said, I had just finished a rewatch of Dragon Ball Z. But I think it brought back an interest in so many people, why they love the show and why they should rewatch the show. I think I can imagine that there were a lot of rewatches of it following Team 4-Star. So I do think that it is an important kind of integration between how they have kept these properties relevant. I've referenced it again, like 50% off. I don't know what free was. I never heard of it until 50% off.
No, absolutely. Because I think the other draw for it as well is, as you said, things like Dragon Ball, Sword Art Online, even Yu-Gi-Oh!, Pokemon especially as well. There was a Digimon one as well, but I cannot remember for the life of me who did that. If it was like a Team 4-Star adjacent one, or it was just a group of really talented VAs that came together to do it.
I'm not sure. Interesting you kind of bring that up, because I don't know if you remember, many years ago, Team 4-Star held a Abridge-a-thon.
Oh, yeah.
And so they invited amateur abridgers to participate and submit a like one-off abridged cartoon for, I think they were 10-minute long as the capacity. And they kind of promoted these channels through that. And I watched some really good stuff from that. The one that won actually wasn't one of my favorites, but there was some really interesting content that I kind of got from that. And I think some of them I ended up following and watching their content afterwards.
Because as you mentioned there, it even opened up the possibility of collaboration with other people, especially in the Aboriginal community. Because I remember the one that you and I watched, and this is vividly burned into my memory.
Card games on motorcycles.
That's the one. Yep, the Yu-Gi-Oh! It was the Yu-Gi-Oh! Film, but it was like several films.
Into the Next Dimension or something. What was it called?
That's Spider-Man. No, jokes aside. Yeah, it was like, I don't know, card games in dimensions or something.
Now in 3D.
Yeah, exactly. That was the big draw, that they had Yugi Moto from the original series. They had Jason Yuki from Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, I think. And then they had whoever the motorcycle guy is from Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds.
5D's nuts.
There's the Abridged spirit. And yeah, it was those three fighting against an interdimensional poker player. I don't know.
I play Pot of Greed.
I play Pot of Greed. In attack position. Yeah, for legal reasons, that's a joke. Yu-Gi-Oh! Fans, please don't shank me with your Pot of Greed cards. But yeah, they did an Abridged series where it was Little Kuriboh. I cannot for the life of me remember who played Jaden in that, but he also did a Yu-Gi-Oh! GX Abridged series at the time. But that's my point though, the fact that you got all of these really talented VAs doing all these kind of silly things together, and it was just so fantastic. But going off a point you brought up earlier, something that is kind of the downside to that, and again, I went to our mutual friend, Martin McAllister, and I was asking him, what do you think makes or breaks an Abridged series? And one of the things he brought up was the humour, because he said how he's not a big fan of when the humour's a bit too crude, and I can totally see where he's coming from, because if you look at especially the landscape of the internet back in the day before the 2010s, and younger listeners won't remember this, but it was an age of a lot more edgier jokes, and you can definitely see that even with the old Titans, especially Team 4-Star. They had some really dodgy jokes back in the day, and they have come out and they've said that they fully admit it was problematic and it was a product of the time. I say that as a joke sometimes, that it was a different time, but it was like very edgy internet humour. There was a lot of very dated meme references. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that, just in general?
It's a difficult one, because I discussed about Dragon Ball Z Abridged, and you can watch that and just get the whole kind of context of the whole show. But whilst the early episodes are very good, as you mentioned, there is a lot there that you go like, that's not a very PC comment joke that they've made there. They wouldn't make that now. And they've admitted as much. They've said if they could, they'd go back and essentially just redo it, because they don't like that they went tolerant to that kind of humor at the time, and it can be on a whole range of different controversial topics that they touch on. And so it is very disappointing when you kind of rewatch it and go like, oh no, that wasn't very good. But you almost have to sort of, as you say, take it as all right, at the time, whilst it wasn't a good thing to do, there were different standards at the time that made it seem more acceptable. Not that it ever actually was, but that you were more easily able to excuse it at the time. I'm going to get cancelled this episode.
No, you're totally right, though. And again, I'm not going to say the specific joke because it is a very horrible joke, but it's one in the Lord Slug movie that they did.
Oh, okay.
In particular, between, I think it's Lord Slug and Bulma.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I'm not going to say that. Like, there's nothing physical or anything. It's more what she says at one point, and I don't know whether I don't think they would have edited it out. I think they probably would have just left it in, but there's a couple of comments that are made, and there's a couple of other jokes that rightfully they cut out of the main episodes, like future Gohan and Bulma. It's always around Bulma. I don't know why. But yeah, there's some jokes that you just think, this is very problematic. And again, it's of the time.
It's dated.
Very dated. Archaeologists are going to dig it up and go, Jesus Christ, put it back in the box.
Just imagining the Indiana Jones, like, guy's face melting. And he just goes,
why won't you dodge? I mean, as I said, I'm referring to the big hitters in this regard. There are hundreds, and this is the thing though, I know I'm pinning it on them, but there have been hundreds of examples that I've seen over the years, and they are just as, if not even worse, in terms of offensive, making very, homophobic or sexist remarks.
There was a huge issue with transphobia and commenting on mental illness as well. There was I know the hard R was used in one of the Attack on Titan Abridged series. I don't know if it was Team 4-Star or a different Attack on Titan series.
See, this is the problem with it though, because there's so many famous ones that when other people try to encroach in that, I'm pretty sure there was other Dragon Ball Abridged series at the early stages, but obviously they've all been drowned out, rightfully so. Whereas when you look at some of these other ones, and the reason I can't cite any examples is just because they're not good Abridged series. They just faded into obscurity. And unlike Team 4-Star that grew from that learned from its mistakes, and it made its humour a lot more broader. I mean, same with Yu-Gi-Oh! As well. Same with a lot of the other series like Hellsing as well. The fact is, they went from memes of the time, semi-problematic, and they grew and they made their own lore for the series. They made their own jokes. You've heard me yell dodge all the time, which I know was an early one, but that developed into one of the catchphrases. And that's what I think differentiates something like Team 4-Star, Yu-Gi-Oh! And all of the other ones, even the Pokemon one. The fact that they had an idea at the beginning of how they wanted to develop it without using the memes as a crutch. So when they stopped using that meme humour, and even when they referred to it, they refer to it on and off again, but the fact is it can stand on its own without that problematic humour, and that is something that I genuinely think is so well done with these. One more thing that I want to quickly bring up though, and I don't know how you feel about this, but do you feel as if the genre of the source material matters when it comes to Abridged series?
No, I don't think so. I think you could easily have a shonen Abridged series or a love story Abridged series or a slice of life Abridged series. I don't think genre necessarily does matter, in my opinion. Do you have a different kind of idea?
Well, there's only one genre that I think shouldn't really be abridged unless the source material's that bad, and that, of course, is comedy or something that's parodying a particular genre.
That's a tricky one because essentially you're trying to make a joke out of a property that's already a joke. So you're doing like a joke on a joke, and I think that generally, even outside of abridged content, just doesn't really work.
There was and this was ages ago, but there was an abridged series I remember seeing for, I think it was One Punch Man especially, and Mob Psycho as well. And don't get me wrong, I've rewatched One Punch Man recently, and although there's one or two, again, we'll get onto that in another episode, but despite one or two really weird jokes, for the majority of it, it is very funny, and it parodies the superhero genre, the shonen genre. It's got a lot of really great commentary and things. So for someone to try and make a joke and a joke, it's almost almost like a heckler at a comedy show, you know, someone who's yelling their own jokes. And it's like, I didn't come to see this random person's comedy routine. I came to see the professional, the one who knows what they're doing. And, you know, sometimes it can work, but I feel as if it's a very risky thing to do. But that's the only, you know, red line that I would say is probably not the best idea. So let's dive into our final thoughts and summarise or abridge. Get what I did there? We talked about the writing and the production value. We talked about the comedy, and we also talked about the genres and everything, and of course what value it brings to the source material as a whole. Genuinely, I think Abridged series, even in the 2020s, although I haven't seen too many of them pop up as of late, there's some for like My Hero Academia, and there's a lot of them that are still continuing to this day. We talked about Sword Art Online as well, which is a perfect example of balancing both funny and something fresh for the audience. I do think a good Abridged series has to balance all of those elements that we talked about perfectly. There's nothing wrong with having a rocky start to it, but at the same time, you have to have a direction, you have to have a goal, and you have to have a desire to develop what you're doing. And that's the same with all content creation, but I think especially for a Abridged series, you can't depend on dated humour or things like that, which would absolutely knock me out the park, because I love my memes and references. But going back to you, Andrew, what are your final thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I think much of what we covered, just saying that an Abridged series can have that lasting impact and can help really elevate a property. We kind of mentioned some of the absolute greats and some that are still ongoing. It's just such a shame that Team 4 Star weren't able to finish their Dragon Ball Z complete kind of coverage. I know they've gone to doing some of their own content using sort of Dragon Ball characters in their own animation, so they aren't reliant on the show anymore. So you do still miss the old school Abridged approach. I'm sure Abridged content still is strong, that there's still content creators making it, but I do think that it has lost the momentum. I don't think there's as many popular ones currently out there. I could be corrected if that's not the case, but I know that content creators aren't able to get the content out with the same frequency as well, where it used to take 2 to 3 months between episodes. It's now taking sometimes years between episodes. Can't think when the last Sword Art Online Abridged episode was. I think it might have been almost a year ago. These people have their own lives. They aren't able to necessarily get all that content out. They'll often start doing other interests, either that being other Abridged series, so they're kind of juggling different Abridged series at the same time, or they start a Twitch channel and want to focus on that, or they just have their own family, jobs, lives that they want to live. But Abridged series aren't dead, so they're still going, but it does feel like a time capsule, and I think that it is a beautiful medium to illustrate and uplift the content, and I do think is worth checking out some of the classics and try some new ones as well that we've not mentioned.
Honestly, I couldn't have summarised that better myself, or abridged that myself. Let's just end the episode. No, I'm kidding. For legal reasons, that's a joke. But Andrew, once again, thank you so much for joining me and talking about what makes a good Abridged series.
No problem at all. Thank you for having me. I need an adult.
I am an adult. And on that very frightening note to end the episode, where can these lovely listeners at home find your content?
They can find me on many episodes of Chatsu Nani, where all good podcasts are found. I've been doing lots of content with you. We did Star Wars month not long ago, and there's been lots of other theme months and just random episodes here or there. You can also find me at GreenShield95 on Twitter, and you can also find my content on a podcast that we also do together with Mark McAllister mentioned earlier and Robotic Battle Toaster, which is Stop, Drop, and Roll Initiative, a D&D tabletop RPG podcast. You can find that where all good podcasts are found at SDRI Pod on Twitter and Stop, Drop, and Roll wherever else.
And as Andrew was saying there, if you want to check out more episodes from ourselves, such as our Star Wars month, as well as all our other theme months and other episodes together, you can indeed check us out on the website, chatsunami.com, as well as all good podcast apps. I also want to give a huge shout out to our Pandalorian patrons, Robotic Battle Toaster and Sonia. Thank you so much, as always, for supporting the show. And if you want exclusive content, behind the scenes, Twitch VODs, all the juicy gossip, where all the cool kids hang, you can check us out on our Patreon for as little as £1 a month, patreon.com/Chatsunami. And And one last thing to leave you on, we're of course a member of the Podpack Collective, so if you want to find out more information, go check us out on the X/Twitter at our handle Podpack Collect, and yeah, we'll see you there. But until next time, thank you all so much for listening. Stay safe, stay awesome, and most importantly, stay hydrated.